Actually, Andrew Steer has just done my work for me in terms of introducing our next panel, but we will be taking Laura and Andrew's, this is not a coffee break, so we don't need to have everybody jump up. We will be taking with us into our discussions throughout the conference, the suggestions that we just heard from Laura and Andrew, and in fact the 4 dimensions of the Sustainable Mobility for All initiative are exactly the framework for this year's conference. We will be picking up on all 4 of those dimensions in our plenary sessions throughout the conference. We've got wide-ranging plenaries. Andrew just talked about the one that we're about to start, but in fact, we've got that kind of very dynamic mix in all of our plenary discussions, as well as in our technical parallel sessions. So we have leaders from government, business, and industry, as well as civil society, who will be sharing best practices and exploring strategies and tools that are already working to drive transport in the direction that we just heard about, to drive it toward real sustainability. So, mindful of Laura and Andrew's appeal that we really need to walk the walk on collective action, we're also going to be talking throughout the conference about how we get a truly joined-up approach to translating commitments into action. So ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of words. You can follow Transforming Transportation on social media at hashtag TTDC18. And please do tweet if you hear noteworthy messages here at the conference, which I'm sure you will. You can also get more detailed conference information and live streaming at our website, www.transformingtransportation.org. And let me just say a very warm welcome to our online audience at this point. And now we will move straight on to our first plenary discussion. And here too, just a couple of housekeeping hints before we begin. Please be sure to have your name badges and your security passes with you at all times in this building. You will need them every time that you enter the building for the next 2 days during the conference. Also, we've got a new Knowledge and Innovations Corner at this year's Transforming Transportation, where you can experience new developments in mobility worldwide. So you can check out advances that range from virtual reality to transit mapping platforms, new cost-effective tools for traffic data collection. Laura Tuck was just talking about some of those. We've got them on display outside in the atrium. And we've also got tools that will allow you to analyze historic climate data and projections for the future. So you'll find that knowledge booth in Preston Lobby right out here, and specialists will be on hand throughout the day to walk you through all of the really exciting innovations that you can see there. And here's a lunch invitation for the early birds amongst you. The Aviation Partnerships for Sustainable Development invites you to join them for a lunch discussion of planning for airports in a connected and sustainable world. That event will take place from 1 to 2 p.m. this afternoon during our lunch break in room MC4 800. And lunch will be provided on a first-come, first-served basis, so if you want to take part in that, do be one of the first 75 people to get there. So, those were my housekeeping hints. Now let's get started by delving deeper into the question of how we ensure that new technologies really do drive us in the direction that we want to go and bring us the transport that we want and need rather than what we have now. Our first plenary is entitled Achieving Sustainable Mobility in a Digital Economy. And as Laura and Andrew just reminded us, truly sustainable mobility is transport that is not only cleaner and greener, but also safer, more equitable, and more efficient. And we heard some examples just now of ways that digital technologies are improving our mobility, from big data to sharing platforms and connected driving, all of them furthering some of those goals, some of those 4 dimensions of the SUM for All initiative. But digitalization's impact is by no means automatic and inevitable. You know that. Without clear leadership from both the public and the private sectors, new technologies can wind up reinforcing old patterns. They can wind up reinforcing existing distortions and inequities, rather than promoting the kind of positive transformation that we're talking about here. As the Global Mobility Report that was just mentioned by Laura Tuck reveals, The need for action is absolutely urgent. In this plenary, we want to talk about what governments, international institutions, and the private sector are doing and should do in future to galvanize rapid and effective action in the direction we're talking about. What's working, where do obstacles lie, and what's needed to multiply and scale up? As Andrew mentioned, that part is so critical. What kind of integrated approaches and partnerships are called for? And what elements should be included in the global roadmap of actions towards sustainable mobility that the Sum for All initiative aims to develop? So those are the issues we want to explore with leaders from a vast array of initiatives and organizations. So let's get started, and I'll ask the panel participants to please join me here on stage. So I'm going to put Davis here. There are name tags, so hopefully everybody finds their seat. Robin, I think, yeah, exactly. There we go. That's nice. Thank you so much. Hello. Nice to see you again. Hello. Pleasure. So they've actually all been introduced, but I will introduce them again nonetheless. And I'll start here in the center with Mr. D.S. Mishra. He is Principal Secretary to India's Chief Minister for Housing and Urban Development. The ministry does steer national policies on mobility and sustainable urban development, as Andrew just reminded us. And it's a great pleasure to have with us Enrique Peñalosa. He is serving his second term as mayor of Bogota, Colombia. During his first term, he helped transform the city and make it a global model for planners by giving priority to children and public spaces, by restricting private car use, including by building hundreds of kilometers of sidewalks, bicycle paths, greenways, and parks, and by creating the Transmilenio bus rapid transit network. So it's great to have you with us again. Looking forward. And it's a pleasure to welcome Robin Chase back to this room. She too has been with us in the past. She's co-founder and former CEO of Zipcar, which is the largest car-sharing company in the world. Buzzcar, a peer-to-peer car-sharing service in France, and GoLoco, an online ride-sharing community. And she's also co-founder of Veniam, which is a vehicle communications company that is building the networking infrastructure for the Internet of Moving Things. So great to have you here again, Robin. Davis Wang is co-founder and CEO of Mobike, which has developed from a small startup to become a global leader in bike sharing. And it is enabling 20 million rides daily in more than 200 cities around the world. Prior to joining Mobike, Davis was Shanghai General Manager for Uber, and he was also one of the early members at Google China, building up its search engine in eastern China. So great to have you with us. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome Philipp von Hagen. He is responsible for investment management at Porsche, which holds the majority of the voting stock in Volkswagen, and that in turn controls VW, Audi, Porsche, and 9 further automotive brands. Porsche also owns the traffic and logistics software provider PTV Group and has shares in the connected driving platform NRIX. So wonderful that you can be with us here, Philipp von Hagen. And now let's give them all a little round of applause for joining us. So I'd like to start out in a first round of questions by asking all of you to talk about your vision of sustainable mobility. We heard something about how Laura and Andrew, our hosts, see it. But I'd like very much to hear from you, and I'd like also to know, do those 4 sustainable mobility for all goals that both of our hosts talked about, do they resonate with you? And what is your government or organization or company doing to realize them? And I'll start out with you, Mr. Mishra.
A very good morning to everybody. Is it okay?
It's on, sure.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, it's my privilege to share the panel with Mr. Peñalosa. I mean, I've heard so much about him, and we've been doing so much of work, what he did in Bogota. So this is it's a great feeling to share the panel with him. Thank you, sir, for giving this opportunity. Yes. Well, sustainable mobility, we think it is universally accessible, affordable, It is convenient, reducing the risk, climate resilient, efficient, and reliable modes of transport. Basically, people are there in the urban areas to realize their best potential. They have to attend to the social and economic needs, school, education, health, etc., business, commerce. There are different kinds of work. So for all that, if we provide such kind of a transport which has all these characteristics, that is the sustainable transport, that according to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And excuse me, I'll move straight away to Mayor Peñalosa.
Sustainable mobility is a mobility with uses in the best way, in a most democratic way, the resources that we have at our disposal. And for mobility, the main resource in all cities is road space. And if democracy means, before anything else, that all citizens are equal, then this has very powerful consequences. We could have some very radical consequences. In a developing country city, by definition, almost by definition of what a developing country city is, only a minority of people uses cars. Therefore, if we were to ban car use during peak hours every day, the majority of people would be better off. The majority of people will have less pollution, less transportation times, less traffic jams. So even if we go to that radical proposition, but the very least that we can do is that we should give priority in the use of road space to public transport. If all citizens are equal, then a citizen who walks has a right to the same amount of road space as one in a luxury car just come out of the shop. If all citizens are equal, somebody on a $50 bicycle has a right to the same amount of road space as somebody in a luxury car. If all citizens are equal, a bus with 200 passengers has a right to 200 times more road space than somebody on a car with one. So I think sustainable mobility is, before anything else, democratic mobility. The biggest challenge to sustainability in developing countries is inequality. Upper income people do not want to go in public transport next to low income people, sitting next to them. When upper income people in our countries go to New York or to London or to Paris, they go back to the city and they are very proud to tell their friends that they are experts in using the Paris subway or the New York subway. But they would never want to be caught sitting next, and so they can sit next to low-income people in New York or in Washington or in Paris. That's very sexy, but they would never want to be caught sitting next to the woman who cleans the floor in their apartment next to the boss next to them. Or they would never want to be caught next to the doorman of their building in the bus. So I think these issues and sustainability have to do, before anything else, with social sustainability.
Thank you very much. So let us now go to the private sector representatives on the panel, and I'll start with Robin. Your vision and perhaps also what you're doing. Our first two speakers were very admirably concise and didn't tell us a lot about what they are doing at the moment, but I'm going to come back to them. But let me ask you to address both pieces, both your vision, but also what you're doing to help us get there.
When I was preparing for this, I'm really amused that I have a new epiphany to share, and a simplification epiphany. So if we think of the four goals, equitable, efficient, safe, and clean, I know four things are too many for you to think about. So I'm going to take it all down to one, sharing. Let me just explain why. If we focused on shared transport and incentivize that, all the others follow. So shared transport in terms of being equitable, it's cheaper because I'm not having to buy the whole asset myself or take up the whole space. So if you focus on shared, it becomes more equitable because it's cheaper. If you focus on shared, it becomes more efficient because it's more space efficient and route efficient. If you focus on shared, it becomes safer because we know typically the death and accident rates are way higher in personal car ownership than on public transit and shared modes. If we focus on shared vehicles, they have higher vehicle kilometers traveled, which means you will choose electric. And so I suddenly realized, forget 4, 1, let's focus on shared. And if we think of all of the past years, we have been focusing on moving personal cars around. And so anyway, that was my little epiphany for the moment. I can keep going or I can stop.
Thank you very much. I guess you like that simplification, Mr. Wang. Sharing is what Mobike's all about. So again, if you would, your vision and also what you're doing to get us there.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce a bit about Mobike, the development during the past 1 or 2 years. So actually, I was here last year for TT. At that time, we just have tens of thousands bags. We were in 9 cities. But right now, totally Mobike, we have deployed more than 8 million bags in more than 200 cities in 12 countries. And the daily user for Mobike is nearly 30 million rides. So let me try to explain the 30 million rides per day means what. So taking Beijing as an example. So the subway in Beijing is transporting 10 million people because Beijing is such a big city. Total population in Beijing is nearly 30 million people. So subway in Beijing is transporting 10 million people a day, and bus 7 to 8 million. Taxi system is roughly 2 million. Guess Mobike, how many people we transport in Beijing per day? 4 million. So we are transporting 4 million people a day through bicycle. So we roughly transport half of the people transported by the bus. We transport twice of the people by taxi. It just happened in 12 to 16 months. So with these 30 million people use Mobike every day in 200 cities so that we can achieve the sustainable objectives, which means if we combine all the trips rode by all the Mobikers, so totally we reduced roughly 4.4 million carbon emissions together, just happening in past 1 or 2 years. That almost equals to we just pull off 1.2 million cars off the road for a year. So I think it has been proved that with the innovative model, which means previously when people are trying to use a shared bicycle, they have to go to a specific location with the station. But Mobike is the first company to create a dockless system, which means people can use Mobike anywhere, anytime. So it's more like, so the difference between station-based bike sharing and Mobike is more like the landline phone versus the smartphone. So people use more a smartphone. So looking forward, so we are thinking to bring Mobike to more cities, more countries, and just imagine that, what about we have 100 million people to ride a bicycle every day, and so that people can connect bicycles, subways, buses in the city, and it's going to be help transforming the transportation to a more sustainable situation. So.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much. And I want to talk in just a moment about how we get all those things linked up. But let me come now to Philip van Hagen as the representative here of the auto industry. And of course, the car has been such a dominant part of the transport picture for the past 100 years. But will it be for the next 100 years? How does the car figure into your vision for sustainable mobility in the future? And how can it truly become a driver of sustainability along the dimensions that we're talking about here?
Thank you, Melinda. And first of all, thank you very much to the World Bank and the World Resources Institute for hosting and organizing this great event. So welcome to everybody here in Washington. Our firm is not, and as Melinda just said, and I just want to state that, we are not a car manufacturer. Whilst we carry the name Porsche, that is a legacy. We're a listed company. Our voting stock is still in the hands of the founding families of the VW Beetle and the Porsche car. But as of today, we're the largest investor and shareholder in Volkswagen, and Volkswagen owns, amongst others, the Porsche brand and puts 10 million vehicles on the road every year. We also, as Melinda said, we recently acquired a PTV and our shareholders in INRIX. So we care very much about the overall mobility ecosystem from an investor perspective, and with that legacy of a family that has been behind democratizing individual mobility. Now, when we think about sustainability, I like Robin with one thing to remember. Studies do show that people can actually remember 3 things. 4 is becoming a little bit challenging. So when we defined our perspective on sustainability, and as I say, with families democratizing individual mobility in the 20th century, we felt we need to also play an important key role in actually bringing about sustainable mobility in the 21st century. We looked at 3 areas. One is the environmental aspect. Secondly, the infrastructure, and thirdly, people, us. And when you look at all of those 3 areas, the car has been blamed for a lot of problems in all of those areas. Cars pollute, cars cause noise emissions, which is a serious problem as well if you live in a big city with all the noise around you, not only the exhaust emissions. From an infrastructure perspective, cars clog up roads, they occupy a lot of parking space, and are yet only used for little time. A lot of statistics point to this 4%, which most of you, if not all, are familiar with. I actually did this calculation myself 2 years ago and came exactly to that number, and I consider myself to be somebody who drives a lot, whilst I also, actually I walked here and I use public transport. I'm a genuine intermodal user. I use the best mode in a situation. But cars are a cause of poor usage of public infrastructure. And thirdly, the people dimension. Cars are not readily affordable for everybody. They're a big capital good, and especially because they're poorly utilized for capital good, it is not very accessible. And so we need to address all of those areas. And this is where technology comes in, and a theme here for this conference. Technology helps solve for sustainability in all 3 areas. And I just want to highlight 3 points. The first one is in relation to cars, it's electrification. Electrification, now many of you will say, okay, it's just going to remove local exhaust emissions and cut down on noise pollution in the city. But I think about electrification in a holistic sense, because electrification now facilitates actually the use of renewable energies that are not always available. Wind does not always blow when you need the energy. But with a lot of batteries out there and a smart grid, you can actually start storing regenerative energies and use them when you need them. So there's a win-win there. From an infrastructure perspective, we need more efficiency, and that can be brought about by software solutions optimizing the use of the infrastructure, as well as then, for instance, sharing solutions that allow us to use cars more effectively. And this brings me to the last point. From a personal perspective, we need to drive down the cost of individual mobility. Sharing is one aspect. Autonomous driving is going to be really transformational, because it's going to take out the worst bit about driving, and that is the driver. The driver is the problem causing most road accidents and road deaths, and drivers are also costly. So we can drive down the cost of mobility. I pause here, because there's more to be discussed in this panel, but those are my introductory thoughts.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to talk now about the governance challenges that we face, and in particular about what kind of leadership is needed from both the public and the private sector to make sure that the new technologies we're talking about, that are doubtless very exciting and promising, but how do we make sure that they do, in fact, drive us in the direction of sustainability rather than simply reinforcing existing pathways? So let me start out with Secretary Mishra and ask you what your main focus is right now in terms of supporting sustainable mobility in India, and what also are the obstacles and challenges you're facing?
Thank you. Well, the sustainable mobility, the question of this was addressed through our National Urban Transport Policy 2006, way back almost 11 years back, when we came out with the policy, and the focus was moving the people and the freight and not the vehicles. Because when you talk of the vehicles, then you make more roads, more flyovers, more these things. So there was more focus on the moving the people and the moving the freight. And there was a major focus on the public transport, on the non-motorized transport, like what Mr. Dang said, the cycle and the pedestrian pathways. There was a focus on the clean energy. There's a focus on this is affordable and quick access to the transport systems. So accordingly, we had taken various measures. In the last 10 years, some 25,000 buses, different kind of buses were provided to more than 170 cities. So there is a bus service in the cities. We added to the BRTS system, what is started in Bogota, BRTS system, some 600 kilometers of BRTS was started. I mean, already 250 kilometers of BRTS is operational. There was a focus on the metro system because the large cities, and the cities has become so dense, there we had to introduce the connectivity. And the first metros came in 2002 when it was inaugurated, the first 7 kilometers in Delhi. And from then on, the journey has been, I mean, we have been going very fast, and so far 430 kilometers of metros that has been made operational, and another 700 kilometers is under construction, under progress at different stages. So this is the metro story, and we are expecting that another, say, more than 1,000 kilometers are under planning. In fact, for the first time, we are getting the regional rapid transport, Delhi connected to the various regional centers like Delhi to Meerut, Delhi to Alwar, Delhi to Panipat, so that people can stay outside Delhi and they can come and, the to and fro in very short time, maybe 30 to 40 minutes, come to Delhi, work, and they can go back. So these are the things which have been happening. Then we have realized that now the way things are going on, we have to give a major focus on the metros not only as a transport system, but metro as a urban transformation system, because wherever the metros has come for the city of Delhi, some 225 kilometer metros is already in operation, and in next 18 months we are going to make it touch around 400 kilometers, and that is going to be the 4th largest metro network across the world. So with this kind of a movement, we have come out with the metro policy, the new metro policy in 2017. And there the focus is to create an ecosystem not for metro, but for the general urban transport. I mean, make this as a comprehensive solution. Different kinds of the modes, they can be promoted. What is best for which place? We have a comprehensive mobility plan for the big cities. They come out with the solutions, and the solutions is so integrated that they address the issue of the mobility in the city. We have now focused on integrating the urban planning and the transport planning together, so that there is no, you can reduce the need for movement across the cities. I mean, you need not spend, say, half an hour or 1 hour moving the city. Rather, everything, we can go vertical, we can have a mixed development, we can have all the things together so that people don't have to move at all. And if at all they have to move, mostly it can be the non-motorized transport. And then, if they have to go for long distance, they can take the rapid transport, BRT or MRT. In fact, we came out with a transit-oriented development policy very recently in 2017, so that the cities can plan in that way. The cities various cities have already adopted, the states have adopted. We have come out with a direction of the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority, which is a mandate under this metro policy. So any city going for the metro, they have to have the AMTA, so that all the different kinds of modes of transport, they can be, they can work together in cohesion. I mean, otherwise what happens is one mode, another mode, they don't talk to each other. They are not seamlessly integrated through the geographically or through the fares collection system or various other systems. So this AMTA is now, I mean, already 3 states have, they are under the process of legislation. Others are also moving in that direction. So we are trying to move these things in that direction. And also there is a focus of Make in India. The Make in India, this has come from Honorable Prime Minister. When we are making so much of investment, why not make these things as we become a regional hub, and from there, the whole region of South Asia and the Southeast Asian countries, they can be served. So we have the new rolling stock companies, Alstom, Bombardier already there. Many other companies are coming up. Like bike, you are saying, it is going in a big way in our smart cities. We have 100 smart cities, and the bike system is coming in a big way. So all this sustainable mobility, I mean, this mobility is a challenge which the country is forcing. In fact, our National Urban Green Mobility Scheme, which we are conceiving, where the major focus is on, we said, digital economy, on the ITS intelligent transport system, on a non-motorized system, on system which is a shared mobility, as Madam was mentioning, and more on a public transport, focusing on the public transport, focusing on a biofuel and the electric fuel, and more innovative ways of addressing the issues of mobility. In fact, the future, like in the urban area, just to give you a brief, in 2011 census, India's population was in the urban area 377 million. What is projected by 2030, our population is going to be nearly 600 million. By 2050, the population is going to be about 750 million in urban areas. We had 35 cities which were million plus in 2001. The number went to 53 in 2011. Number is going to cross 75 in 2021 census, when you have the next decennial census. So we have to address what we have in the urban areas today. Almost double of that is going to come in the next 30 years. So we are going to have a massive investment in the infrastructure, on the water, on the sewer, on the various other infrastructure in the urban area, and mostly in the urban transport, because that is going to be the major issues for the future. So which we want to give a direction to the National Urban Mobility, Green Mobility Scheme, which is going to be there very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Peñalosa, also to you the question about what your main focus is right now in your city, and also how digital technologies figure into that. What results are you proud of, and perhaps also what key obstacles or challenges do you still need to overcome?
Well, commenting on some other things maybe which are not totally directly to digital technology. Mr. Mishra was saying how the urban population is going to treble in India or so, but the interesting thing is that cities are going much more than treble in their size, because one thing that is going to happen too, which he didn't mention, which may be even more important than the increasing population, is the households are going to become smaller. So this will mean that if India, maybe they have today 4 people per household, they will have 2 in 50 years. And so cities are going to grow hugely. And this is, even in Bogota, which is growing much less, we have to build twice as many homes as they exist today, more than twice, over the next 40 years. And so the most important issue for mobility is where the cities grow and how. This is the real issue, much more important than whether we discuss whether it's subways or bicycles, or in a compact city, everything that is sustainable works well. Trains, subways, buses, bicycles, taxis, whatever. In a spread out city, nothing works well. Like when I was landing in Dulles yesterday, I said, first of all, I would never want to live in one of these isolated houses there with this big garden where I have to take the car to go buy a piece of bread. Yeah. But Besides that, it's totally impossible to have sustainable mobility there, regardless of digital or technology or flying saucers or anything. So the most important thing is to have, first, compact cities, and that's where we are trying to work towards, and we have many obstacles because the Colombian constitution, for example, gives too much autonomy to the municipalities. So surrounding municipalities, where it's the most logical thing that for the city to grow, they decide, for example, they don't want to grow. Or some other very far away municipality that does the opposite. They decide they should allow low density, Washington-type suburban growing. So I think this requires some almost changes to the constitution so that nothing is more important for mobility, for quality of life, for anything that how and where our cities grow. And I think we are doing this wrong almost everywhere in the world, at least in Colombia. I think there are another thing that is an interesting issue is there is a big political discussion between rail and buses. I think this is more and more irrelevant because of technology. Because very soon, more and more, the difference between buses and rail is going to be more irrelevant. Because what makes a difference? The rubber wheels, I mean, some subways have rubber wheels. Or more and more, all transport will be electric. So, and with computer-driven systems, for example, when you have three-bodied buses, we have now buses which in Bogota operating, which hold about 250 passengers, three-bodied buses. So 4 or 5 of these driverless buses, electric buses, computer-driven buses going 60 or 80 miles per hour or 60 kilometers per hour, 50 centimeters one from the other. What is the difference between that and a rail and a train? But they have many advantages because they can change lines, they can take streets, since they can go operate 5 at a time or 1 by 1, they can have much higher frequencies at the low peak hours. So the challenge is, the more important, more than technology, is how to have the cities grow dense, and the important thing is to have obstacle-free corridors. Once you have an obstacle-free corridor, call it a road without traffic lights and without cars, or a rail line or whatever, then you have sustainable mobility. You have density plus corridor-free, traffic-free corridors for public transport. And so, if you ask me what we're doing, basically, we have in Bogota, we have at this time 100 and this is to say how BRT has a great potential. Delhi subway has more than twice as many kilometers as Bogota BRT, and we move the same amount of passengers with the BRT as Delhi subway. I'm not talking about Washington subway, Delhi subway. So this shows the potential. We have only 112 kilometers, and we move like more than 3 million people a day. But now we are going to do 250 kilometers more. We have a goal that in 10 years, 85 or 85, between 85 and 90% of the homes in Bogota will be less than 1 kilometer away from a transit line. So we are doing about 250 more kilometers of BRT plus a subway line, about 25 kilometers. So this should be very powerful. Plus, we are going to have almost 90% of homes less than 1 kilometer also from a main bicycle trunkway. Today in Bogota, for every 3 people on a private car, we have 1 on a bicycle. We have almost 1 million trips by bicycle every day. And so this is our goals, and technology helps all of these things, from the operation of buses. Buses have many advantages over subways, as well as subways may have some subway buses. But one of the advantages of buses is that when you change lines, you don't have to get out, get off, walk 2 blocks to wait for the next train. The bus can change lines, plus other things. But this makes bus systems very complicated to use for somebody who doesn't know the route. So technology can be very useful for that, for people to know what buses they need to take to go from one place to another, for example. For example, if I go here to the Washington subway, it's very easy to know how to use the Washington subway, because it's very few lines, and you have to change. But to use the bus system is much more difficult. But once you have these things in your phone, which tell you what bus to take, where to get off, all of these things help. There are many little things we're doing. For example, in a month, we'll have Wi-Fi in all the BRT stations to make it a little more attractive. Also, our transport secretary, who is here, we are using more and more we have forced taxis to use some digital system similar to Uber to charge rates. And though this way they cannot overcharge the driver, they have to take the shortest route to go from one place to another. Plus, this gives us the information where the people are going, from where to where. So many little things like this are important in digital, but I'm sorry to take some, but just to say that I think the most important issues are still political. It's political how to provide, just one little thing. All higher income people, every developing country in the world, they love subways. They are the most staunch subway advocates. But not because they have the slightest intention of ever getting into one of those things, but that they imagine.
So how are you getting them to get onto one of those things? What are you doing?
This is an excellent question. Very excellent question. In Bogota, as all developing country cities, we have very segregated city. Rich people live in one area, poor people in another area. And we have one avenue. I would say that in a stretch of maybe, it's called Carrera, 7th Street, in a stretch of about maybe 5 kilometers, within 500 meters in each side of this street, we have, I would say, at least 25,000 of the 50,000 richest and most powerful Colombians. At least, not of the richest, most powerful Bogotanos, but the richest, most powerful Colombians. And we are going to put a BRT line there. I would not say through the heart of this area, but through the belly bottom of this area. And so, the higher income people, you can live in a $2 or $3 million or $4 million apartment. But if you're going to your office or to the airport or whatever, you can choose between taking 20 minutes by BRT or 2 hours by car. So I think what in terms of mobility, I like to say that what is an advanced city is not one where even the low-income people use cars, but the one where even higher-income people uses public transport. And so I think once we get these higher-income people to use public transport, and they will almost have to do it. Why do people in Manhattan, the upper-income people, or in London, they use the subway? It's not because they are more democratic, a little bit because of that, but also because they have to.
Have to get there fast.
And so I think this will create this social integration, which is the goal.
Thank you very, very much. Robin Chase, you have talked in the past about the potential for technology to reinforce existing patterns. So car sharing, is that technology that is reinforcing exactly this kind of inequality in society? Is it, in other words, a rich person's technology?
If we think about technology, it's always kind of agnostic, right? You can use it for good or evil. It can produce good outcomes or bad outcomes. I'm both pessimistic and optimistic. My pessimism lies with the framing of the status quo regulations and how we divide streets up that we are favoring in every way. Personal ownership is paying less than its fair share. But if we look at technology, there's these amazing opportunities. So Zipcar and all-car sharing that's well used is replacing 12 personal cars. And that is wholly enabled by technology. And if we think of the transit apps and what Enrique was talking about, my ability to navigate on a bus or choosing between bus and transport is enormously facilitated by the technology of smartphones and apps. And as we've moved to the potential of real ride sharing, actually getting more than one person in a car, it's enabled by that. And then the future of self-driving cars is enabled by that. But as we've seen, as we're living through the Didi, Uber, Lyft short-term catastrophe and some benefits, and if I think about the impending autonomous vehicles, how policy shapes the use of that technology, and do we continue to enable the underpricing of road assets? That gives me some pessimism. I see it's not going to work. So I just wanted to be short, and there's this thing I've been working on for the last few years called Shared Mobility Principles, and I wish I had a slide for you guys to write down and go look at sharedmobilityprinciples.org. And it's a set of 10 principles that a number of NGOs around the world, including WRI and C40, have signed on to, and some private sector companies have signed on to it as Mobike, and we're getting cities, and the idea is to create this one shared set of goals and principles, and you both have mentioned things that are on that list, that we need to think about moving people and not cars. That's a principle. We need to build housing and transportation together. That's a principle. We need to make efficient use of our assets. That's one. We need to encourage and incentivize sharing. So I want to urge you all to go look at those things, and that if we can all be aligned on those principles, the private sector, the NGO sector, the civil society, and cities, we will start to row together, and technology will fit into that stream and go towards the path that we want. But technology alone, as we know, can produce good or bad outcomes. So I have real optimism if we take the proactive route.
So at the close of this session, I do want everybody to come back and say a few things about what you think should be included in a global roadmap, and maybe you can come back to the principles at that point. But one question I would have as a follow-up question, because you were so brief. Looking at ride sharing that you mentioned, what would you want to see from policymakers to push that piece forward? Because that certainly does seem to be a dimension that fits the 4 goals that we're talking about.
What's intriguing about ride sharing that right now we have seen over the last year and a half in New York City and in San Francisco, those cities alone demanded full data from Uber and Lyft. So those cities alone are the ones that have been able to do the actual analysis. What's the reality versus the promises? And we have seen that, yes, people are moving from transit into these vehicles that I actually want to say are often just taxis, because it's just one passenger.
I mean multiple passengers.
And
just
so
to
the
clarify.
multiple, and so the multiple passenger, and they're also moving from walking into those. And there's a lot of anxiety about what it's doing to public transit. My feeling is we are underpricing every vehicle that's moving on those roads. And so right now there is a desire to penalize and tax these, do you guys know the term TNCs? These TNCs and the pooling, and not only to that, to not incentivize the pooling within those. So Chicago just put out a really, I think, very negative tax where they're taxing per trip on those vehicles, and they're taxing them more than taxis, so they are disincentivizing me to do pooled taxis. But I do feel like it's an amazing opportunity, and cities need to treat all vehicles on the road equally. And so if we start the terrible idea and word of congestion pricing, we need to put personal ownership in the same path. And when we put the single ownership, if they're paying the same amount as anyone else that I'm going to start sharing. I'm going to start pulling that ride. I'm going to start using it. So just to end with some real optimism, I am delighted that people are getting the behavior of, I take out my phone and I put in an origin and destination and I choose a seat and I go there. That is an amazing behavior. But we now need to get people to pay for a seat and think that they're going to be sharing it with a rider. And when I look at Enrique, I put shared transport in a continuum. And so if you are very wealthy, you're going to share with 2 people, and if you're less wealthy, you're going to share with 20, and if it's a peak time, I always want you to share with 20. But this, as a behavior, I think has real potential, but we have serious issues now with putting that ride sharing into context with all the other things that are happening on the street.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Davis Wang now about where you see the potential to shift people away from cars and into cycling, and in particular into bike sharing, and what you need from policymakers in order to foster the ability for that to happen.
Yeah, actually, it happens. So, there is a so-called last mile challenge. So, but you look at some cities like in Shanghai, in China, the average distance for mobikers is roughly 2 to 3 kilometers, which means for such a short distance travel, bicycle is the best way for people. I mean, it's also the fastest way and also the convenience. You just spend like 10 to 12 minutes and then 1 RMB, and then you just complete this travel. On the other hand, is that we have met some oversupply issues in some city. So, for example, in some cities there are roughly 500,000 bikes occupying the public resources, and people have some complaints. We have called on this issue back to last July and trying to work closely with the local authority. I think that's the only way to enter a private company to work closely with the local authorities on the permission issue, on the number of bike supply, etc., so that we can together to make a high efficient bike transporting system.
So, I am a passionate cyclist. I live in Berlin. At least in my part of the city, we have dedicated bike lanes. We've got a lot of parks, and we've got very clean air. When I travel to China, I really wonder whether I would want to cycle there because, among other things, congestion and air. Are these issues that you talk to policymakers about, and would that affect people's interest in bike sharing?
Yeah, back to 2 or 3 years ago, when I talked to the professors, talked to the policymakers, talked to the media, and nobody believed that the bicycle is going back to people's life. So at that time, we thought about that. So what about we just persuade people to try to use bicycles, and then once there is a sizable or mass of people is going to use bicycle, and then the policymakers, the media, the professors, they are going to change their attitude. So actually it happens. So for example, in Chengdu, the mayor of Chengdu is planning to build more than 600 kilometers bike lanes. I think Mobike is one of the drivers to persuade the local authorities trying to build these bike lanes. I mean, otherwise, it may happen in 10 years. So, but we also realized that because we put we put all the GPS, the sensors on every log. So every mobile, every bicycles, they have those kind of the sensors, the data, so that we can use this kind of data to present to the policymakers to persuade them that so here is the data pack, here is the usage of your citizens in your city. So what about we can work together to come up some sort of solutions for better transportation? That's super important.
You might consider presenting your policymakers with fancy cycling gear, because at least in Germany, some politicians will show up at an event in their tight bicycling togs,
Yeah.
and they get points for that.
Yeah, why not? Because last year was the 200th anniversary for bicycle. So actually, we were in Berlin, and Berlin is the 200 cities for mobile. So we would definitely do something like that.
Very good. Thank you so much. So let me come now to Philip von Hagen and ask you about what technological hurdles you think we have to surmount to realize the full potential of some of those technologies that you talked about in the area of the car. So both electrification, but also autonomous driving. What do you think we need to see from policymakers, governance initiatives, to really bring these to fruition?
Technology, and let's talk about data, it's all data-driven, is a lubricant, and it brings together for the first time those three different elements I talked about: infrastructure, people, and the fulfillment side, the vehicles, whatever it is, whether it's a tram, whether it's a subway, or whether it's a car or even a bicycle for Mobike. And this means that we need to get intermodal communication and systems that allows us to exchange that information in an efficient way whilst respecting also individual privacy, which is always a very big topic, certainly in the car industry, less so perhaps in the technology world. But we do care very much about this. We need to get the benefits of that technology without really restricting people's individual freedoms and liberties. And for this, we need a lot of stakeholders at the table, and that makes it a lot more complicated. Previously, you had perhaps a city just deciding on the rules, or certain private organizations. Now, in order to bring about those efficiencies, you need to have everybody at the table and also produce results, which with an enlarged group of constituents, such as the one sitting here, for instance, is always a bit more of a challenge in the outset. But if there's a common objective, and that's where I think governments, cities play a central role in defining what those objectives should be that we want to achieve for a city, for a country, for a certain community, and then we can all work towards realizing those objectives.
May I just ask you, because we talked in the opening dialogue about new players, and certainly we see new players now entering the automotive space. Google. Is it a car company? Is it on the way to becoming a car company? Amazon also moving more and more into mobility-related areas. And what does that mean also in terms of governance? What do you think that we will need to see from policymakers in adjusting to a very different cast of characters?
First of all, I think we welcome innovation around mobility, and innovation comes from different parts. It comes from the traditional engineering side, but it also comes now from the technology companies such as the ones you mentioned, but also other ones. And we need both. We need both. We need more cooperation, and you see a lot of news coverage, especially over the past couple of months, which actually demonstrate that companies are cooperating and pooling their respective knowledge. That is no longer a monopoly confined of one or the other. And a lot of people over the past couple of years suggested that car companies are doomed and everything is going to be run by the big players in the United States. I do not believe in that. The fulfillment side of mobility is very complicated, very demanding. There's a lot of experience, and the car companies are also stepping up now and embracing modern technologies. I think we will see a lot of also progress, therefore, on the car side and not only on the technology company side. So I think what's very important is that we have a level playing field for all players, and this is the governance that you refer to. We need a level playing field. We need clear set of parameters for people to be able to deliver the right sort of solutions in this area.
Thank you very much. Let me pick up now on the issue of stakeholder coordination, which you just mentioned, and ask all of you to speak very, very briefly to a few aspects of that. And I'll come to Secretary Mishra, first of all, with two particular questions, and with the request to be brief, if you would, because I'm hoping to get a few audience questions at the end. Mayor Peñalosa gave that very strong appeal in his last remarks for greater coordination with urban and land use planners to try to ensure compact urban development. Very challenging for established urban centers like those in your own country. So what are you doing there in terms of that kind of coordination between transport authorities and land use planners? And then secondly, something that you mentioned in your remarks that I read about in researching this panel, namely the move to mandate networking among rail and other transport operators. As I understand it, there was a strong lobby, very diffuse group of players, and you have now mandated that they network with one another. So perhaps you can tell us just a little bit about that as well. So two questions essentially: coordination with land use planning and networking of operators.
Thank you. The first one is when we talk about sustainability. And I mentioned that the urban planning and the transport planning has to go hand in hand so that people, the first thing is, the best thing would be people don't have to move at all. Most of the things they do on foot or maybe through the bicycle, take care of everything. And for that, you need to go vertical. You make the best use of your resources, So for that, we have come out with a transit-oriented development policy. The cities which are going to come, or the cities which are already there, they can be redeveloped into a transit-oriented development, so that people have all the needs. Is a mixed development, whether it is their commercial needs, their health needs, entertainment, education, everything right there at an accessible distance. So this kind of a transit-oriented development policy the Government of India issued in 2017 May, which there have been consultation across the various states, and some of the states have already adopted it, and they are moving in this direction. The second thing is about the UMTA, Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority, because transport is something which is being addressed to various kinds of modes. For example, metros is very much there in big cities, but there is a bus system, and bus system not only by the one operator, by many operators. There are IPT, intermediate public transport. This is a small tempos or such other systems. All these things together, how they can talk to each other, how the whole thing can be unified to address, ultimately it has to address the issue of the people. It has to be people-centric. They have to address their mobility. So how these things can be addressed? There can be single common mobility card. We have come out with for the first time, we have come out with a national common mobility card specifications through our national payment NPCI. So Corporation of India and National Payment Corporation of India. So we are going to have the cards in the cities, and already the city of Kochi, city of Bangalore, city of Ahmedabad, city of Lucknow, they have already adopted that, and they are going to come with the card so that the same card is used everywhere. That timetable, they're all talking to each other so that people are able to move in a seamless way. So these are two things which I mentioned, and I think they're definitely going to have impact in our cities. Thank you.
Mayor Peñalosa, same question to you. Laura and Andrew both talked about the great need for collective coordinated action. Where would you say that's absolutely most critical? And can you give us perhaps an example?
Well, as Robin said, everything has to be shared here. Everything is coordinated action here. Again, I believe for developing countries, the great challenge is how to get cities to grow in the right place. But there are some issues, like to end with technology, reference to technology. Mr. Von Hagen mentioned the issue of privacy, because actually the ideal thing really is to charge for road use to each car, satellite tracking of each car, and to charge for what road they use, at what time. And this technology is very simple, but it has been restricted by privacy concerns. But this is what really where we have to get to. I mean, because we usually talk about the cost of building and maintaining roads, but even the road space in a city is extremely valuable. And it belongs to everybody the same. So the low-income people are renting for free the road space to the upper-income people who use cars, or to people who use cars. So we should really charge a lot for car use, but the rational way to charge for car use would be a satellite tracking. But now, the privacy concerns can be solved somehow by robbing proposals of shared cars. Because if you use your own car, they can know where you are going and at what time and all this. But if you're using some shared cars, it's more difficult to track where you're going or how. So I think somehow we have to get to that. And one last comment, just about some political positions, again, because I'm not expert in technology, I'm not in politics either because I lose a lot of elections. But I just like to say that electric cars or shared cars or whatever you want to call them, they will be in a jam. They'll be in a traffic jam. So it doesn't matter if they're electric or if they are shared or if they're whatever. So if you want to go quickly, you need exclusive right of way. Exclusive right of way. So public transport in exclusive right of way, be it a rail line or an exclusive BRT line or whatever, that's the only real solution for fast traveling in large cities. And this is a political issue. Once again, I would question, whether we should put public transport users underground. It does not seem to me very democratic unless it's absolutely necessary. If I'm going through a old European city where you have to go through a downtown built 500 years ago, the only way to go through quickly is underground, of course. But in most cities built in the 20th century or after, you don't have this kind of structure. And so you have many roads. So just I would end up with one last political comment. 100 years ago, women could not vote. Not in Colombia, they could not vote in the United States, or in France, or in England. At least in the United States at the national level, they could not vote. And everybody thought this was normal. It was not Nazis who thought this was good. No, everybody thought. And it seemed there's some things, some horrible injustices sometimes are before our noses, and we think they are normal, because we are so used to them. As 100 years ago, your great-grandfather thought it was normal women should not vote, unless he was an eccentric. In the same way, to have a bus with 80 people in a traffic jam is almost as undemocratic as having women not vote. And this is an injustice that is before our noses, but we think this is totally normal. So, again, I think the political discussion of democratic political discussion of how this road space is going to be used, how it will be distributed, is still a long way before it's solved.
Thank you very, very much. I think I'm going to make a break there and come back at the end and ask for the briefest comment on the global roadmap and the main priorities you see for that. But I'd really like to get a few audience questions in. So if you have a question, dear members of the audience, here are 2 microphones in the center of the room. And please come to a microphone. We won't be able to hear you unless you stand in front of the mic. And let us know, please, who you are. And keep your questions, if you would, quite brief, and then we can get in a few different ones. Please.
Good morning. I'm Cecilia Briceño from the World Bank, the Transport and ICT Global Practice. Thank you very much for a fantastic panel. My question is regarding the deterrence to increase use of public transportation and shared facilities, right? And that is, me as a woman, one of the main deterrents to use it is my personal safety, how I feel the possibilities of being harassed, of being, the victim of a crime and so forth. My questions to all of you probably is whether that has been a concern and how you have faced it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would bundle questions if I have more right now, but it doesn't look like I do. So I'm not going to pose it to everyone, or that will fill our time up. But Secretary Mishra, we've heard about incidents in India, of course. What are you doing? How much of a concern, and is there real political commitment on this?
Yes, this is it's a big concern which is being addressed through having the camera inside the maybe metro system, inside the bus system, and also sometimes marshal, especially in the night. The night buses, there is a marshal who can take care of, there is any incident, they immediately take care of that. So that's how it is being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. van Hagen?
Yeah, perhaps let me just add one point again where technology comes in, and this is also in the car sharing a great feature, is that you now know who is actually using the transportation systems. You have the identity of people, and that will continue to increase. And so at the moment, systems like Lyft, etc., work also on the basis of that you rate the driver rates you as a passenger as well. It's a community of trust. This is how sharing communities operate. It's the trust, it's the reputation, and by knowing who is actually using the transportation, you also, you're no longer anonymous, and that should also help improve safety.
Robin?
Yeah, I feel like you got one half of the equation, because I think it's true, is that through technology, we should be knowing which is the specific driver in the specific vehicle and the specific passengers, and so it does enable this kind of safety piece. And I'm sitting next to you, and I also have 2 daughters, so anyway, I'm pulling this together. I actually think in public transit we should have more women-only cars until we have a huge cultural change and men stop doing what they're doing. But I think that's one piece that we need to have.
In fact, now we already have. If you drive in our city, you'll find a lot of women car drivers, bus drivers, and metro drivers. We have plenty of women. They are very much there in our cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say, anecdotal and getting a bit personal, but my mother was asking me about the Me Too movement, and she said, you know what? I would be on the list of Me Too, and she cited an incident in the New York subway in the late 50s. So that fascinated me, and she said the problem was congestion. You mentioned the issue of women and safety, so perhaps you have some thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yes, it's true that security concerns are a big obstacle to sustainable mobility for bicycle use, for stealing bicycles, and for this women harassment in the public transport too. I think this is a challenge we have in our society. In Latin America, maybe Colombia, as others, we have much lower crime rates, more and more and more, but still our judges, for example, we capture bicycle thieves, and it's almost impossible that a judge will put this person in jail. The judge will never put these bicycle thieves in jail, and much less to have somebody who harasses a woman in the bus or in something. So I think we need to go much farther to be much more drastic in terms of sanctioning, punishing the people who do these kind of things. I have very mixed feeling about having these women-only cars. I think they have a lot of things that are more against women than in favor. Sometimes it tends to be negative, this kind of but if this, we have been discussing a lot this in Bogota. We have not yet come to a conclusion, but generally our conclusion has been that it's better not to have this kind of thing because it ends up affecting women. or the whole transportation system. It's very complex. But I think at least we have to advance much more. But I mean, we have at this time a crime problem, a criminality problem. Too many of our so-called minor crimes are simply not punished by judges, and there are not enough jails in the country, not enough judges. And so I think we would have a great advance if we have much more awareness, such as is happening now over the last couple of years here in the United States. If this becomes much more of an issue, a social issue, and a legal issue, once we are able to put in jail, at least for a week or so, a few people who do this kind of thing, we would have a great advance. But I don't know of any case, even where somebody who has harassed a woman in a bus or a public transport or anywhere in Colombia has been put in jail even for 24 hours. So I think we have a long way to go in that direction.
So Davis Wang had a thought as well, I think.
Yeah, I think one key word there is the digital. So in China, the penetration of mobile payment is, I think I'm seeing more and more people to use their digital mobile payment to pay the fee for bus or subway. So just imagine that previously people used the coin or cash to take a bus. So the rider are so you will never know who is taking this bus. But imagine that if 100% of the rider they use the mobile payment, so which means the user account or user real name information has been recorded, so that you will know who is taking these vehicles, and then the rider is going to be more safer than before. So the technology will definitely help.
Thank you very much. So I have a few questioners here. I'm very brief.
Just one sentence. This our city council women. We have at this time a discussion at the city council about where to give some priority seats in the buses, more priority to women. And some of the ones who are more staunchly opposed to this, because they consider this to be finally discriminatory against women, are our city council women. One thing that it's illegal, I'm not going to propose it, but which I think has been effective is when is social networks. When people who are harassers are taking pictures and these pictures are distributed in social networks. This is not very legal, I will not propose it, but this I think can be very effective.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask for very brief questions, if you would, please, and we'll take the first two and then the latter two.
Yeah.
And let us know who your question is addressed to, if you would.
Thank you. It's basically not a question, it's more a comment. I'm Klaus Bonham, the CEO of the Danish Cyclists Federation, also here representing the steering group of the World Cycling Alliance. I just want to encourage all of you to include the socio-economic benefits of cycling in the future planning. We know from the city of Copenhagen where 41% of all everyday transport is made on bicycle. We know from calculations made by the Danish Ministry for Transport that for every single kilometer we exchange the car with the bicycle, we actually save the Danish society for around $1 in prolonged life and improved health. So just to say that investing in infrastructure for sustainable mobility like walking and cycling is probably one of the best public investments that you can make because the return of investments is so incredibly high. So just an encouragement for that to all of you, and good luck with your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Manfred Neun, the acting president of the World Cycling Alliance. It's my pleasure to continue with the economic approach. And I like it very much, Enrique, since we have been in the panel 2011 at the ITF, that you are becoming more consequent, also in a certain economic sense, saying, okay, real public space is really an asset, is a value. According to this, but also according to the Sustainable Development Goals, where are a lot of economic targets in beginning with the number 1, the overarching one. Even the gender goal, number 5, has an economic impact, and so on. We made a study to how many of the Sustainable Development Goals cycling and walking, what we call active mobility, is contributing. And these are 14 of the 17 goals. We have evidence for that. And it delivers a high amount, not only for cities, as Klaus mentioned, but overall, for example, in Europe, it's more than €500 billion per year. This is incredible. So, therefore, I like the sustainable mobility approach for all very, very much. And I would like to ask you, what is, from your perspective, really the impact and also the perspective for asset development on this green growth? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then we'll just get a very brief roundup from all. Go ahead.
Right. My name is Madeline Zhu. I'm with Where is My Transport? And thank you so much for the panel. It's great to see representatives of some great companies and other private sector financiers here. My question is about that. What is the role for private sector financing, whether traditional venture capital or other forms of investment, for creating this kind of sustainable mobility vision that we have? And how can we get the private sector to actually engage that way?
Thank you very much. And one brief...
Hi, this is Hatem Chabani from the World Bank. My question is to the whole panel, is really on how to reconcile the two concepts that seems to be diverging within your panel. Clearly, the right-hand side of your panel seems to be more pro-private sector, sort of free market logic, and the left one, sort of the middle left, more towards the democracy on a pure sense, Puritanian sense of it. How do you actually compete with the road space? Should you price it? Should you price the road space? In which case, if I'm rich and you could put the taxation you want, I'll still use my car. Or should you impose the right of access, irrespective of the purchase power, to everybody, and then ultimately everybody will push them into the public transport? Where is the really sort of the middle fine line in between? And how should it seems to be is more of a political issue, sort of an ethical issue than really technology or any aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me try to wrap all that up into one question that goes then to all of you as essentially final remarks. We had here the question about essentially green mobility and the key principles that you think need to be addressed there, which was essentially my final question to all of you anyway. So the key measures or principles that would be part of, say, a global roadmap heading toward green mobility, and then the question about private sector financing, and the question about how we deal with the kind of externalities that you all talked about in terms of roads. So do we need a rights-based approach or a pricing approach? That would be essentially how I would sum up that third. So if you could kind of bundle those all into just a few sentences, and I'll go right down the panel, perhaps starting with Philip van Hagen.
Sure, thank you, Melinda. There's been a lot of talk about public and private sector. What I see is a convergence, actually, of public and private sector in the area of mobility, as mobility is becoming a little bit also more democratic through sharing, for instance. We cannot simply rely on underground networks to provide transportation for every individual, or just large buses. We will see smaller buses, but on more efficient routing, and when they're autonomous, you can also take out a lot of the problems from individual driving behavior to create smooth transportation network. And then when it comes to actually the negative externalities, this is where, again, software comes into play that should help administrations, communities to formulate those objectives and goals. And you will need to price externalities. You need to attach a cost or price to use of public infrastructure and identify what objectives you want to achieve in certain parts of your city or community, whether you want quick transportation, or whether you want clean air, or whether you want quiet streets where people can play, etc. So those policies need to be formulated, and once they're formulated, and this is where software can also help, then the private sector is incredibly innovative in providing solutions, and within that framework, I think we will get great solutions and much more swiftly without necessarily having to rebuild infrastructure.
And Mr. van Hagen, as a representative of the private sector, this global roadmap, which is one of the goals of the Sustainable Mobility for All initiative, what would you want to see? What would be your top priority that should be on that roadmap for us to be heading toward the mobility we want?
I think we need to be more open towards innovation and create areas at least where we can experiment and with new technologies and thereby introduce them more swiftly into society. We are too slow of actually reaping the benefits that are theoretically already today available to all of us.
Thank you very much. Robin?
Rolling everything into one sentence. No. So, what I've learned from transportation over the years is I used to believe only in shared vehicles exclusively, and now I think we have different life phases and different times of our, different times of our life, different incomes. So I really believe in transportation. We need a diversity of offering. That it's a key cornerstone. We need a diversity of offering. Yet, within that, we have to level the playing field among those modes. And so my key thing is referring to shared mobility principle. Number 7, fair user fees across all modes. This is really, really critical, and that lays this this level playing field and your issue of governance with the new cast of characters. If we get to this place where, and to the equity piece, I just want to throw in, as a human, I think you're right, is 1 square meter for free. No charge. Once you start adding pollution, we need to charge you. Once you start taking more than your allocated square meters, we need to charge you. So I feel like there's this fair user fee across all modes which aligns biking, walking, going alone in my big, huge car, deciding to do a smaller footprint, go by transit. So I'm really, this fair user fees across all modes puts this level of playing field, allows the diversity of offering, allows the private sector to come in with different ways of doing things, but we have to, the fair user fees across the modes include your airspace, like air pollution, and how many square meters you are taking up.
Thank you. Secretary Mishra? It's on.
Well, Mahatma Gandhi has said that nature has enough to serve everybody's need, but not anyone's greed. Why I say so? Because when we are traveling, single person using a car and using a large space on the road, polluting the environment, there are so many negative things coming from there. The number of cars over the year have gone multifold, many more times than the population growth. Whereas on the other hand, the number of people using the cycle or using the pedestrian pathways, that has come down. So here is a time to look back, to see that how public transport can play a major role in the urban area for the future. Another thing which our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, you may be all aware, while inaugurating the Smart City Mission in June 2015, he mentioned, what is smartness? Smartness is getting more from the less. That means using your resources, what Mahatma Gandhi said is a limited resources, in a smart way so that you are able to serve more and more people. What she said is shared mobility or the public transport mobility, using the technologies in the best possible way so that we are able to address the issue of transportation. I think here is an opportunity. As I mentioned, half of India, half of the urban India is yet to come in the next 30 years. There is going to be massive investment across the country in the urban sector, in the transport sector, and here is an opportunity the Government of India has offered through the FDI in the real estate, FDI, the various kinds of opportunities is available for investment in our country, where you can come and be party to the new urban area which is coming up, rejuvenated, new renaissance, where we want to improve the livability, and that has been the foundation will lead through the Smart City Mission, foundation will lead through the various other initiatives, many policies which are coming up in India. So I think this urban mobility, sustainable urban mobility is very important thing. Somebody mentioned what private sector can do. You can come, invest in India and be party to the new urban India. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Peñalosa.
Well, I would just end up saying that all of this is very politically difficult. Everything is extremely difficult because actually people who have power in society want to use cars and they want to use motor vehicles in general. And as Robbins suggests, we should charge to them. But it's very difficult to charge them. We just had some revolts in Colombia last week because some regions, they want new roads, but they don't want to pay for the tolls. And so it's very difficult to charge. Ideally, as I say, we should have some kind of satellite tracking system to charge for car use, and we want to charge, should really learn to charge more for car use than for car ownership, and of course the distribution of road space. I think these are the real issues of equity for the future, these kind of issues, how to distribute road space between different users. And all of this is very difficult, but I would say that in Bogotá, I have been in many cities in the world. And one of the cities where it's more readily accepted that we take away space from cars to give to public transport. And even if some people don't like this at all, they generally are ashamed to say it publicly because they realize it's just, but still, we have some very difficult political battles, and in other cities, I worked once, for example, in San Francisco, where they think they are very progressive and all this. They love to think of themselves as progressive. And they have this, they were thinking of a BRT in one of the most central roads in San Francisco. And they did not dare even to take away the park cars on that road. I mean, not even to take. So this is, and in India, the Supreme Court of India, at what time, I think it has been changed, but it ruled that it was not, it should not, they did not allow they forced the exclusivity of the BRT lanes in Delhi to be taken away. The Supreme Court. So all of these are very difficult battles, but I think they are necessary.
Thank you very much. Davis Wang. Sorry.
Transportation is a pretty traditional industry. But if you look at the past 5 to 6 years, we've seen that the Zip car is kind of changing the people how to run a car. And also Uber is changing the way of people use taxi. And Mobike is trying to provide more convenient and affordable price services to people use bicycle. So traveling within a city, the experience is not a pleasure for people who live in most of the cities worldwide. So for example, if you just go to a subway station from 7 to 8 a.m., you will see taking a subway, the experience is really bad. But I've seen Zipcar, Uber, and Mobike is doing something good to really change the way of people moving around the city. And the key is that people want a convenient services. People want a cheap price. So
what should be on that global roadmap? What would be your single greatest priority for?
I think the technology is super important. Only technology can help to improve the efficiency, reduce the price, and also to create a convenient services. So I'm going to see there will be a lot of changes in the coming months, coming years. For example, the new way of bicycle sharing, electronic vehicles, how to use technology to run a car, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the close of this first plenary. Certainly, it seems evident to me that the global roadmap, we can take the word road in that quite literally. There's a strong consensus here that we need to be thinking differently about how we look at road space, how we share road space, how we price road space, and the equity of road space. So that's certainly one takeaway for me from this panel, amongst many others as well. Many, many thanks to all of our speakers. We're now going to take a coffee break, 15 minutes, and then please be back in this room punctually to resume with our next plenary. You will find refreshments out in the lobby area. Do check out our knowledge and information booth, and see you shortly.